Hi, everybody. We're still just waiting a couple of minutes here for MP Chong, so just bear with us. We'll be with you in a sec. Hi, everybody. Well, I think we're still waiting for MP Chong to join us, but I think I'll kick us off anyway, because we do have MP May, and I know she makes for some pretty fascinating conversation on her own. My name is Sarah Benex, and I'm the Executive Director at GreenPAC, and I wanted to welcome you to what's going to be another really interesting session. GreenPAC is really proud to be co-hosting this session with the Samara Centre for Democracy. And we'll be in conversation with MP Elizabeth May and hopefully Michael Chong too, as well as Dr. Alex Marlin. And we'll be taking a look at how parliamentary system, our parliamentary system, impacts environmental leadership in politics. I wanted to let you know that all of today's participants are being entered in a draw to win a copy of Samara's book on how partisanship affects the role of MPs. Like all of Samara's amazing research, it has the great title of Real House Lives. If you haven't checked out Samara's resources, please do. Their naming is just brilliant. And I'd like to turn the floor over now to Samara's research manager, Adelina Petit-Goriot. Through Samara's research, Adelina works to demystify government and make Canadian politics more inclusive, approachable, and appealing. Originally from Winnipeg, Adelina works on civic engagement for youth in Toronto's nonprofit sector. And one of the things I noted she observed is that participating in politics doesn't mean knowing all the answers. It means asking the right questions, which I think is a great segue into this session. Over to you, Adelina.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely do not have all the answers, but that's why we have our esteemed group of panelists today. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this session with us. For those who may be unfamiliar with the Samara Centre, we're a non-partisan charity working to strengthen democracy in Canada. And our flagship project, which Sarah referenced just a couple of minutes ago, is the MP exit interviews, which is exactly what it sounds like. Interviewing former MPs who either decided not to run again or who were voted out of office. And so these interviews provide a rare opportunity to meaningfully engage with former MPs about what's worked, what could be improved in our parliamentary democracy according to their own experiences and as they've experienced it. And the info we've gathered from these last sets of MP exit interviews are presented in Real House Lives, our latest book. And a lot of what we heard was extremely encouraging, very enlightening. Across party lines, there's a very strong ethic among MPs of good governance, of respect, of responsibility. And so MPs are public-minded people who are in politics for the right reasons. But the interviews also highlighted the day-to-day obstacles that parliamentarians face in driving change and pursuing policies that matter to them, which for many MPs includes driving environmental change. So simply put, there's a lot that gets in the way of good people trying to do good work in public life. And MPs told us that they find themselves policed by party leadership, even by their own caucus members, which are their own colleagues. This is the phenomenon known as party discipline. And some MPs, especially backbenchers, so those who are not cabinet members, are silenced because there are a lot of headaches, a lot of headlines too, that come with individual MPs thinking for themselves in public. And so the rules and procedures of Parliament can also be an obstacle to MPs. Simply put, which party gets to determine the agenda, the makeup of committees, who gets to speak during debate, and so on. That really affects the ability to push for change. And MPs have told us, among other things, that they struggle to hear from citizens, even though there's a really big desire to be able to get their opinions. So uncovering these obstacles to empower independent public leadership, and in this case, as they relate to work on green environmental policies, it's an extremely relevant and important conversation to have, because most of all, it also enables us to identify the channels that do work, that are most successful in driving environmental change. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from all the panelists. I would also like to thank them for taking part today. And to moderate this discussion is David McKee, the Deputy Manager Editor of the National Observer and an award-winning investigative journalist from CBC Parliamentary Bureau. Welcome, David, and please take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I'm looking forward to this. Actually, I've been thinking about it for a while. And so I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists and then putting questions to them and hopefully inviting questions from participants. So we first of all have MP Elizabeth May, who has represented Saanich Gulf Islands in Parliament since 2011 and is the former leader of the Green Party of Canada, a role she filled from 2006 to 2019. Before entering politics, Ms. May worked as a senior political staffer, helping to establish US-Canada agreements on acid rain, and as executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada. A GreenPAC endorsed MP, Ms. May has presented hundreds of amendments to bills in Parliament and is recognized as one of the world's leading female environmentalists, a very hardworking MP indeed. I got to see this up close as a producer of Power Politics. Michael Chong is another GreenPAC endorsee who represents Wellington-Halton Hills. Mr. Chong has been a long time climate leader within his party, publicly supporting the Kyoto Protocol despite his party's then opposition, co-founding the All-Party Climate Caucus in the House of Commons and running in the 2017 leadership race as the only candidate to support a price on carbon, a policy that his party has sort of adopted depending on who you talk to, and hopefully we can dig into that in a little bit. In the last session of Parliament, he helped introduce and pass legislation to create the Rouge Urban National Park. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Alex Marland, a professor of political science at Memorial University in Newfoundland, an award-winning novelist, co-editor of the UBC press book series, Communication Strategy and Politics. Dr. Marland's 2016 book, Brand, Command, Canadian Politics and Democracy in the Age of Message Control, won the Donner Prize for Best Public Policy Book by a Canadian. His 2020 book, Whipped Party Discipline in Canada, examines the hidden ways that political parties exert control over elected members of Canadian legislatures. So welcome to all of you. Michael, I was wondering if I can start with you, because your party has made news recently with the whole, call it what you will, carbon pricing, climate, taking climate seriously, whatever you want to call it. But I was wondering if you can kind of, because you have been an advocate of carbon pricing of some kind, I'm wondering if you can kind of peel back the veil and just give us a sense of what you think of your party leaders' recent pronunciations on carbon pricing and how that might align with your own beliefs.
Well, I think the recent announcement by Aaron O'Toole is an acknowledgement that the Conservative Party needs to have a real plan to reduce emissions if we're going to be competitive in the next election. One can quibble with some of the details of the plan, but I think it's been generally acknowledged that this plan has been priced out and that it contains measures that will get us to 2030 under the Paris target. So my view is that the party is evolving on this issue. I think the focus on the personal carbon savings accounts, I think, is a bit of a moot debate, because my view is that the three provinces where the federal backstop is currently in place will be coming forward with their own plans. And so there will be no federal backstop, I anticipate, in a year. And that means that there will be no requirement for these low carbon personal savings accounts. So I think the party's evolving on this, like parties do on so many issues. And I'm encouraged by that.
I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up question, if I may. When you say evolving, what does that mean? How does that align with your beliefs?
Well, I think there's an acknowledgement that we have to price carbon. I think when you look at the plan that Aaron O'Toole announced, he has essentially left in place the price that the federal government has put in for all but the consumer side of the economy. He's essentially said that we're not going to lurch from one plan to another if there's a change in government, that on the industrial side of the economy, the current government's pricing plans will remain in place. On the consumer side of the economy, he's done a bit of proposed a bit of an alternative, which is that the federal price will remain in place up to $50 per ton, and then beyond that, use regulatory mandates such as a requirement for a minimum number of EVs on the road by 2030 in order to make up for the remainder of the price. So I think that's a market change from what we had done in the past, and an acknowledgement that Canadians want to see a price on carbon.
Elizabeth, you want to jump in there? I'm sure you have a few views.
I wanted to, I don't know if Michael Chong will appreciate me praising him at this point, but in the context of the whipping, so I know you expect me to jump right in on climate policy because I normally would, but Michael Chong is the most extraordinary human being in that he was able to disagree with Stephen Harper, exit cabinet when his prime minister had brought in a motion to Parliament over a subject which was Michael's responsibility as intergovernmental minister. And we had this was a long time ago, so people forget things. Unfortunately for me, I don't forget things. I'd be much happier if I could forget so much. But I remember the moment, I remember every moment that every government has failed to achieve its climate targets. I remember distinctly, and I remember what was happening at the time. But back to this issue of being whipped, and how do you operate as an individual member of a team? And Michael Chong was uniquely able to say to Stephen Harper, you've brought something in that with which I don't agree. And I'm not in cabinet anymore, but I support my leader because my leader's made this decision. Clearly the leader didn't want to include me in this, so I've lost the confidence of my leader. And then one of the most brilliant people in the House sat without any strong role within his party, except you could have been leader. That would have been good, Michael. But anyway, as I said, you're not going to appreciate me praising you, but I thought it was a good sign that Aaron O'Toole, recognized talent and said, okay, Michael Chong is the official critic on foreign affairs for the Conservative Party. Now, that said, as you will have realized, that the Climate Caucus is and remains, although in COVID we haven't met for quite a while, an amazing thing that we would, through this time of real polarization around climate, have several Conservatives regularly participate, and on the executive, plus Bloc, plus Green, obviously, plus Liberals. I mean, all the parties in the House work together in the Climate Caucus with the goal of trying to raise the level of discussion, turn down the partisanship, and be able to work with each other. And in that same spirit, I'm now chair of the Democracy Caucus, and I've been sending sideline chats to our friends at Samara because we've been trying to get together with them. But we've had remarkable meetings about this very topic of how do we as individual MPs get to do our work without interference from our political parties. Now, in my case, the Greens have a policy that, and when I was leader, and actually who enforces party discipline on leaders? The media. So we have a policy against whipped votes. We will never have the leader say, this is how I want you to vote. And it's interesting now because our leader isn't in Parliament. Annamie Paul is fantastic. But we meet as a caucus, the 3 Green MPs and our leader, and work to come to consensus. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't agree, but we don't have whipped votes. And the people who hate this are the media. So, I mean, I got in all kinds of trouble because Vashi Kapil, you may remember this, on Power and Politics, asked me, if someone came forward with a right to life motion, would you whip the vote? And I said, well, I don't have powers to whip votes. That became a pumped up story, which was fake, that the party was soft on women's rights and the right to have a safe legal abortion. It all got lost in, and Andrew Coyne's made this point sometimes in the media. If parties don't have party discipline, who beats up on us? The media. So it's a complicated story, and I have great sympathy for my friends in other parties as I watch them vote for things that I know they do not believe in. And you wonder, what did you sign up with this party and say, yes, I tick this box that says, I will now check my brain at the door. I won't need it. There's no point reading the legislation. There's no point thinking about the legislation because I'm going to get a little slip of paper right before the vote that tells me how to vote. I mean, it's a pernicious system that wastes talents of genius people who are, just as our Samara introduction said, civically minded, public interest, very committed, making, frankly, it's a sacrifice of anything like a personal life to be a member of Parliament. Not weeping about it. I love my job. I'm running again. But this is a very important topic, is what I want to say. That the ability to work across party lines is what Canadians want to see. Do the people who've never run for office, who are the backroom manipulators in everybody's political party office, they were never elected? Why do they get to dictate based on a future election strategy and some catchphrase that they've got ready to go for attack ads, how MPs are going to speak in the House, including how MPs are going to heckle in the House? Everything, depending on what era of which party we're in. But certainly, I mean, Bob Rae let his MPs loose, because by the time they were reduced in 2011, 10 years ago tomorrow, that vote that took the Liberals to third party status, Bob let them do whatever they wanted to do because they were just so unhappy. But generally speaking, every leader I've seen in other parties has held their caucus pretty tightly. And it's a very bad system.
I'm just going to jump in there, Elizabeth. You raised a lot of really great points. Alex, I want to bring you into the conversation. And just if you could, just close the loop on the evolution that Michael talked about of the Conservatives on the whole climate change issue and that policy.
I'm not sure that I can speak to that, because that's not an area that I've got expertise in. You'd have to ask.
Or just general, just general, like as a learned observer. Just
short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, what's easier for me to talk about is party discipline that Ms. May was mentioning, and that is that I interviewed more than 130 MPs, political staff, and parliamentarians across the country. These two fine individuals were among the people who are kind enough to speak with me for the book and are quoted in the book. And I think one thing when we think about party discipline and why it is that people are expected to vote with their party, as Ms. May was mentioning, is there is a lot of social pressure, and that came up in the Samara interviews as well. And I've looked at some of their transcripts. But beyond the social pressure, there's an incredible amount of pressure to vote the party line. But what we've seen with media changes and technology changes is there's also an incredible amount of pressure to publicly toe the party line. So it's not just, it used to be at one point just kind of what happens in Ottawa. And there was that old expression that Pierre Trudeau had, who cares, everybody's nobodies once they're away from Parliament. Well, now everybody's a somebody in the sense that you can look at somebody's social media feed at any time. But that also includes members of your own party. That includes members, opponents. That includes members of the media. And as soon as people start noticing, this person's saying something that's different than the leader or different than the party, then people start jumping on that. And then it becomes a news story. And so the way our system is designed in Canada is it's not just towing the party line when it comes to voting on bills and motions. It's towing the party line in public, which is effectively, we now have message discipline. It's no longer just party discipline. And that in turn obviously has implications for a Conservative MP, getting back to your original question, how they might vote. They might actually support some action when it comes to the environment or climate change, but the party position is X, and therefore the only real recourse that you have as an MP, the way that you express dissent, is you go for a walk when the vote comes up, or you just magically come down with what people call the diplomatic flu. That's how you express dissent in Canada.
Michael, I'm curious, like, how difficult was it for you to be almost like the outlier? When you were talking about carbon pricing, it was considered to be a job-killing carbon tax. It was orthodoxy, and you were a lone voice out there. How difficult was that for you?
It wasn't difficult because I felt I was contributing to a debate. Nothing is worse in politics than shouting into the wind and nobody is listening, right? So while I knew I was not gaining a lot of traction at the time within the party on this debate, I knew I was creating a debate, an important debate that the party needed to have. And, I often thought of the late John Crosbie. For most of the Conservative Party's history, we have been resolutely anti-free trade. We're the party of the national policy of a massive tariff wall around Canada that prevented the importation of many goods into this country. And that was a long-held policy of the Conservative Party till the 1980s. John Crosbie in the 83 leadership race campaigned to do away with that policy and to embrace free trade. And he lost that leadership race, in part because he was pro-free trade. Well, a few short years later, in in 1988, Brian Mulroney, based on that debate during the leadership race, the previous one, but also the McDonald Commission and other reports, embraced free trade, and the party has never looked back from that. So when I campaigned on the idea of putting a price on carbon, on a revenue neutral carbon tax, I thought of it in the longer term, that contributing to the debate to me is one of the most important things we do as elected members of parliament. And so I relish the chance to play a small part in advancing that debate in my party.
Mhm.
David, can I jump in here?
Yeah,
Because
go ahead. Yep. Mhm.
Canada has failed on the climate crisis, and we can't, as Thomas Homer Dixon wrote in his last book, Commanding Hope, he doesn't want to tell his children that that we're a failed species, and we're on the brink of it being too late to tell our children we really can look you in the face and know the science and know you have a future. That's horrific. But when I look back on decades and decades, you mentioned, David, I'd worked in the office of the Minister of Environment back in the 80s. Now that was in a majority conservative government.
Mhm.
I wasn't a member of the Progressive Conservative Party, and I hadn't voted conservative. The minister who hired me wanted to have somebody in his office. I was, an environmental activist and an environmental lawyer, and he wanted to have someone on his political staff who got all that stuff. And so I got trained up on climate science by Environment Canada scientists when we used to have them. We don't really have a strong science component in Environment Canada anymore. But when I look back at what happened, because look at that was a conservative prime minister.
Mhm.
Brian Mulroney holds the record. No one's come close for greenest prime minister since Brian Mulroney on the ozone negotiations that saved the ozone layer, on the climate negotiations that got a convention to Rio and saved it, on biodiversity. I mean, so in that era, there was no partisan wedge issue around climate.
Mhm.
I maintain right here and now that in the context of this discussion around political operatives and political strategy and party discipline and all that, go to someone I love reading because she's so smart, Susan Delacourt's book, Shopping for Votes, details carefully the ways in which the notion of using the first past the post voting system to cobble together a majority based on targeting individual candidates and individual electoral districts and saying we can win that one because we need a wedge issue. So Stephen Harper was the first one to realize you can win a majority government without ever really trying to appeal to the majority of Canadians. You do it clinically, you do it with collecting the data, you know targeting each riding. So the notion of political consensus, which Greens believe in, we do consensus decision making in the Green Party in the 80 countries around the world that have Green parties, and we have about 40 or some that have elected Greens. All of our decisions are by consensus. We resonate to consensus decision making. But our political strategies, because of first past the post, do not want consensus. Consensus is the enemy of a political strategist that wants to be able to say, you got to throw those bums out because look how they voted on this wedge issue or that wedge issue. So it's the partisanship of the political process, which has distorted the normal approach. And unfortunately, it's filtered up to us from the United States. And Susan Delacourt's book documents that too, the use of vicious attack ads to try to be more polarized all the time. Well, I think we're seeing how dangerous polarization is in the United States. We can see how dangerous that is. We really need to think about how to get our political discourse much more on a consensus basis and stop having the political strategists in the back room stop smart people, regardless of what party they're in, from agreeing with each other and solving something. Because it's absolutely dangerous right now. And I mean dangerous in the sense of, will human civilization make it through this century? Will our kids be living in a Mad Max kind of dystopian horror film? That's, it's a great line of Al Gore's years ago, was if we didn't act on the climate crisis soon, we'd be, the world would be like taking a nature walk through the book of Revelations. Well, here we are, plagues, fires, floods. We have to actually act like grown-ups and say partisan politics is a threat to our survival, because the countries that get it right, like, and I'll stop the rant here, but the UK has a Climate Accountability Act they put in place in 2008 that really works and worked. And it looks nothing like the fake thing that we've got in Parliament right now, because the Climate Accountability Act was brought in a Labour government in the UK and stayed on track through several successive, quite right-wing conservative leaders, including currently Boris Johnson, who's got the most aggressive climate target of any country on Earth. And they're already not just miles ahead of us, they're light years ahead of us. This is a very interesting thing. How did that happen that even in a first past the post country like the UK, they held firm to a plan?
Yeah.
I despair of the way in which first past the post, combined with our super focus on the Prime Minister and the PMO, reducing the ability, for instance, and Michael knows this argument well because his reform bill would have dealt with it before amendment, that we're the only country in the Commonwealth of Westminster parliamentary democracy where an elected caucus can't say to a prime minister, sorry, you're way past your best before date. We are replacing you now. We're not having a convention. So that's just a bit of a rant. Canada
just let me jump in. Just let me jump in.
Challenged here.
Yeah. Just let me jump in because I think I want to pick up on the party discipline, and I want to hear what Alex has to say about this. When we were getting ready for this panel discussion, we talked about the fact that in some ways, what's happening in the Parliament with regards to measures to battle the climate crisis, which it is right now, are really a lagging indicator in that what's happening in the real world. If you take a look at the divestment movement among young people who are putting pressure on banks to divest from fossil fuels, if you take a look at investors putting pressure on companies to divest, things are happening in the private sector. And it's almost as if the political conversation around what we should do doesn't really jive with what's happening in the real world. So we came up with this theory that maybe Parliament is a lagging indicator. And I'm wondering, Alex, to what degree you think that the parliamentary discipline and what Elizabeth so expertly talked about, does that really mean that it's hard for Parliament to really reflect what's happening in the real world?
I think in some ways, the first thing we need to think about is a lot of parties are really concerned about winning votes, especially, and when I mean votes, I mean winning elections. When you're in a minority parliament in particular, that's something that's on the horizon. Political parties in Canada really look at public opinion research and try to understand what is the pressing issue. And in some ways, in fairness, the question really is, to what extent do Canadians feel that climate change and other factors related to that are the pressing number one issue? As long as they feel that it's the number one issue, then you're going to have political parties gravitate in that manner. And then the messaging that's going to go out to their candidates and to MPs is going to resonate around that. But as long as people are concerned about other things like the economy or pandemic and all this sort of thing, then that's where political parties and their strategists are going to chase what they perceive to be as votes. So I would say that it's not just what Parliament is doing, it's really what are Canadians as a whole prioritizing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, if you take a look at some of the polling, for example, that I have, climate change is about third or fourth place, right? I mean, people are understandably concerned about COVID and healthcare and so on, and climate is not up there, not yet, but that could change in another few months.
I thought it was further up than that. I thought it was still, at least it was very much in the 2019 election, right up there. But my comment would be that once people are differentiating, and this is also a problem of how well it seems like I'm beating up on the media continually in this interview, which isn't very
okay,
smart.
we're used to it.
Not smart, but don't bite the hand that feeds you. Paul Martin used to say that a politician who complains about the media is like a sailor who complains about the ocean. But the point is, we have a problem that we don't have specialists in climate science anymore in our national media. We used to, like at Rio Earth Summit, we had, it was there were just every single newspaper had a science specialist who knew all the science around environmental issues. Mm-hmm. So we don't have a big way of actually differentiating between, it came down to almost like a gay pride march. If you march in it, if you're marching in a protest on climate during the September 2019 global marches. So I was marching, Trudeau was marching, Jagmeet Singh was marching, and Andrew Scheer didn't. So, but wait a minute. It's not just because Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau are marching. Does that mean that they have a climate policy that's really good? No, it doesn't. It just means they're marching. So that for a voter to differentiate at the ballot box, we needed much deeper analysis of what each party that, in favor of climate action, what does that look like? And to this moment, I haven't mentioned yet, nobody should be satisfied with any party's policies on climate unless it aligns with the science that tells us we can avoid the loss of human civilization within our kids' lifetime. That's an important thing. And that's not policy or polling. That's just like with dealing with COVID, that's listening to the science. So we didn't say to Theresa Tam, you want us to stand 6 feet apart. Oh, come on, Dr. Tam, that's not reasonable. We think, we'll compromise and we'll stand 3 feet apart. And we know the Conservatives would be worse. So that's okay then. No, this is science. You've got to do what we're instructed and warned, which is a substantially deeper target than what the Conservatives are now willing to go with, which, with all due respect, Michael, isn't the Paris target. It's the target that Canada had at the time we negotiated the Paris Agreement, not updated to deal with what must be done, and that Trudeau kept for all that time until last week, and we're still well below where any other G7 country is in terms of ambition. So, I mean, it's a bit of a rant, but I think people get away with the notion that they have a climate plan because they suddenly say, yes, I accept that climate change is real. Well, that isn't a policy, and it's not enough. You have to actually make massive changes that are really hard and will take a lot of political courage to align with what the scientists say we have to do.
At this point, I've been reminded that we do have a Q&A, actually. We do have questions from the audience that I'd like to put to these esteemed folks. This one comes from Katie R. And Michael, I'll put this one to you. Can more be said about the informal environmental discussions that happen between MPs? How are environmental topics explored by MPs within and between parties? And what are some examples of how that influences things in the House?
Well, thank you for the question. It's a great question because often this stuff happens in closed meetings behind closed doors. There's a lot of discussions that take place between MPs of all parties who are interested in climate science and climate change. I'll just point out two in particular. Elizabeth May led the charge to create this all-party climate change caucus several years ago, and I think it's been a really good vehicle for facilitating those discussions. I remember when Elizabeth invited the head of the chief executive of the California Air Resources Board to come and talk to us about what they were doing in California to reduce emissions. And it was a really, really good discussion full of details and facts. And it was quite the opportunity actually to meet with the head of the organization responsible for emissions reductions in the world's, I think, 4th or 5th largest economy, an economy bigger than Canada's and more populated than Canada's with some 40 million people. So we've had many of those discussions over the years that have been very helpful in helping to foster debate and help us think through these issues. The other example is more recent. We had, I and others in the caucus had set up a number of meetings with UK members of Parliament on the issue of climate change. And as Elizabeth has pointed out, for the better part now of 13, 14 years, there has been a multi-partisan consensus in the UK Parliament about climate change. Legislation that was passed under a Labour government was subsequently supported by a Conservative government. They've got an independent committee, climate change committee, that adjudicates their plan, that manages their plan in an arm's length way. And so they've been quite successful in reducing emissions. So we have been working with the UK High Commission in Ottawa, as well as with civil society groups here in Canada, like Clean Prosperity, to facilitate those discussions. And out of that, I'll give you one little practical example of how that shaped our thinking as Conservatives on the plan that Erin O'Toole just announced. We decided that we just can't keep lurching from one approach on climate change to another. And so when Erin O'Toole made his announcement, he deliberately said, look, on the industrial side of the economy, we just can't change the rules because we've had a change in government. So we are going to, in effect, stick with the framework that the current government has put in place on the industrial side. We're going to obviously collaborate with the Biden administration if they introduce carbon border adjustments and work with them to make sure that Canada, as part of the North American economy, is in sync. But we're not going to just wholesale change these plans just because there's been a change in partisan stripe of the government. So that's an example of how these discussions between parliamentarians, not just within Canada, but overseas helps shape thinking on party policy.
Alex,
And I
do you
just-
think that, I just want Alex to jump in. Alex, do you think that the climate crisis will spur more of these kinds of discussions among MPs, more cut down on the partisanship and more on the cooperation?
So I think what the pandemic has told us is you sometimes need society to agree that there is a crisis. So everybody who's tuned in today, I'm sure would feel, yeah, there's a climate crisis at play, but there's a lot of Canadians who don't feel that way. And so until you potentially get society agreeing that this is something that is urgent, that requires immediate action, this is something that in political science and public administration literature, they refer to as policy windows. So the idea is that every so often there's something that happens and it creates a policy window that action can be taken. 9/11 is a good example of that, that 9/11 happened, all of society is focused on this. They're sometimes known as focusing events. And what ends up happening is everybody mobilized, say, right, this is a priority. We have to get every single department in the government working on this. All politicians are concerned about it. We need to do something quick. A lot of the time, Parliament, all of a sudden, it doesn't matter. This one of the concerns is all of a sudden everything gets rushed through Parliament because suddenly MPs don't matter. And so you have to get to a point where there is, unfortunately, an agreement in society that there is an urgent need to take action now. And even though, as I said, there's a number of people here who would agree on that, the reality is that a lot of Canadians are not at that point of thinking.
I would dispute, Alex, that a lot. I mean, maybe as much as 14 or 15%, that's a lot of a population, but the majority level of support for climate action is quite high in terms of polling for a long time and quite sustained. But I just want to get back to the question Katie asked. One of the reasons our climate caucus has been, and I really appreciate, Michael, that you think it's been as successful as it has been, but what we wanted to create was a space where no one could be abused over something that they thought or said out loud outside of party discipline. The meetings are always off the record. We don't invite media. And people have permission to ask a dumb question, because if you're new to climate science and you're in a room with MPs who've been working on it for a long time, you don't want to open your mouth and feel that you're about to be jumped on because you've asked something. We're very gentle with each other in that caucus. We want to bring people in who've never thought about climate science before. So it's been an educational tool in a way that says we have to work across party lines. It's the only way we'll ever solve anything. We used to have that far more, like back in the day when I worked in the minister's office in the 80s, the parliamentary committee process was a place where there was less partisanship. And it was through the Harper years that the committee process became partisan. But the parliamentary committees worked largely in the shadows. People weren't tuning into parliamentary committees. It was never the case, and when I say never, who knows, maybe in the 1890s it happened, but I missed it. But since I've been paying any attention to Parliament in the mid 80s till the Stephen Harper era, we never saw MPs badger and be rude to witnesses. We never had as much scripted questions from, say, PMO to be asked to witnesses. Now, I know some MPs would refuse to ask the questions that they were handed from the background. I want to put on the table, one of the problems we have today is that scripted questions and answers, particularly the answers from the government side, are prepared from a civil service. And I mentioned that Environment Canada is not strong on climate science anymore. I've been watching in this C12 debate, good people putting out in their responses to opposition questions things that aren't true. This is disturbing. Liberal MPs are saying things in the House that are easy to check and simply not true about what we agreed to in Paris, for example, saying there's nothing in Paris about any year but 2030. That's just not true. It's easy to look up. It's not true. And I contact individual MPs afterwards and they say, well, that's not partisanship and that's not PMO. So this is a new problem we've got, is that the capacity of government departments, and I'd say right across the board, I think Big Pharma has too much influence in Health Canada, but Environment Canada had a lot of scientists leave through the Harper years and a lot of economists hired. And I have nothing against economists, but if you're fundamentally talking about climate science, you better have strong climate scientists in the civil service so you don't get the kind of poor policy. It's mediocre when you need excellence, right? You need excellence because we're up against it in terms of our carbon budget, and we're going to exceed our carbon budget well before 2030 and lose the chance to hold to the most hospitable possible climate that we can now get, because we don't get to go back to a really nice one. We're not going to get that for a long time. So this is so in terms of problems that we face, as in the questions that I got from GreenPAC ahead of time, what do we do if we're green champions and we're environmental champions and we're operating as MPs? We have a new problem now. We have a civil service that gives well-meaning MPs false information to use in the House. And we have hyper-partisanship around committees and in the House, and party discipline. And obviously, we do make friends across party lines. We have also, I'm going to give credit to Nathaniel Erskine-Smith in the Liberal Party, put together a tremendous caucus where we now meet on animal rights and animal cruelty issues, where our champion from the Conservative side is Michelle Rempel-Garner. I mean, we work together quite well when given the chance. But we do need to address the lack of climate literacy in our national media, the lack of climate expertise in the key government department, and the way in which partisan politics has increasingly focused on polarization. And again, social media plays a role in that for sure. But I'm just going to say we've got some challenges here, and we've got to figure out how to do this right while we've still got a chance.
I want to jump in there with a question from Emma. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground there. Civil servants, if we had more time, I'd challenge you on that one with some examples, but we don't. The media, we've taken a few shots, and I must say that working in the media, we do feed off partisanship. We do feed off people like Michael Chong disagreeing with their leaders. That results in segments on shows like Power and Politics, for example, where I used to work. I get that, and I think that that's a problem, quite frankly. But I'd like to circle back to policy, and a question from Emma Kirk. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And I want to put this one to Michael. And Emma asks, beyond domestic carbon pricing, what are your thoughts on introducing a green tariff to better incentivize green business practices within here in Canada? What do you think about that?
Well, that's an excellent question. And it's a pertinent one, because I think that's where we are going as a country. It's clear that the Biden administration has an ambitious plan for climate change. It's also obvious that Canada is an integrated part of the North American economy. You know, fully a fifth of what we produce in this country every year, from automobiles to aluminum to corn to a range of services, is for export to the United States. 1 in 5 jobs, 20% of the economy. And so it's clear that we're going to have to work with the Biden administration in order to ensure that there's no carbon leakage outside of North America. So if we're going to have a robust North American continental strategy on climate change, we're going to have to put in place border carbon adjustments to ensure that we're not importing products from outside of the North American perimeter that are being produced without this price on carbon, putting our own domestic North American industry at a disadvantage. So I think that's where we're going. The exact details remain to be seen, but I think in the next 12 months we'll have greater clarity on that. And our commitment is that we'll work with the Biden administration to ensure that we have that North American approach.
Alex, how much of a challenge is that? Because you in order to get anything through Parliament, you need a certain degree of cooperation, and now especially in a minority parliament. So is this feasible? I mean, does the political discussion that's happening now make a measure like this even remotely feasible?
It's interesting you say that. I mean, really, honestly, the MPs here are better able to answer that than I can. I think while Mr. Chong was talking, I was thinking about, what is it that the Green Party could potentially do to advance some of these ideas? And I would argue that one of the things that I would think that would be useful for the Green Party to do is to stop talking about climate change so much. Now, I know you're going, wait a second, whoa, what is he saying? This is and the wrong audience, right? I think that in order to be able to get a greater number of people elected and have more influence in Parliament, you need to be known as more than a single issue party. And so if you're able to communicate to people, everybody knows they own that policy space. Nobody's going to question the bona fides of the Green Party about environmentalism. So if you're now able to talk about some other policy issues that captures the imagination of a greater number of people, there's often something called the median voter theorem, and I won't get too complicated about it, but the idea is that there's a great number of massive people out there who are ready to vote Green. But if all they think is the only thing the Green Party stands for is climate change and things like that, they're not ready to go there.
I know it's so funny, Alex. It's been a frustrating thing that David's heard me talk about it over the years, that the Green Party's never been a one-issue party. But I think our new leader, Annamie Paul, is knocking it out of the park, in that if you were to scan the press releases of the last, well, since she became leader, it's a long way from being even the most often that we talk about climate, because Annamie's talking about the need. How do you confront COVID? What do we do about long-term care? I mean, she's really ahead of the curve on almost all, I think every issue myself, but she's doing a fantastic job. But if that is good advice, she's already taken it, because, and in the case of, it's funny about being Green, that we were the first party to call for equal marriage. A lot of people don't know that. We were the first party to call for legalizing cannabis. We were the first party to call for a guaranteed livable income, even before I became leader. We were the first party to call for pharmacare in recent times. But what happens is we take the position out there first. We know we're not going to form a majority government. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, because maybe Annamie will, but our goal is to be in a House of Commons and push and make a difference, and to have more collaborative politics, to have more respectful politics, and to actually do evidence-based decision making. So we've never been a one-issue party, but people, they don't know that. It's for sure the case that that's the perception.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about that, Michael?
Oh, I think that's very true. I think, voters want, when they're voting for a party, they want to make sure that the party represents a range of views on a range of issues, has a set of policies on a range of issues, because you're talking about here forming a government. Mm-hmm. And obviously governments have more than just climate change to tackle. So I think it's a good point. There's something earlier that Elizabeth mentioned that I think Alex could touch on as well, is that there's been a big fundamental shift in our system over the last 50 years. Elizabeth has raised this in the House many times. Up till the 1960s, rights attached to individual MPs and individual candidates, not to parties. But in the 1960s, a series of legislative, non-legislative, written and unwritten changes came into play over a series of years that have increasingly accorded rights in the House of Commons and in elections to parties rather than to individual MPs and candidates. And in that context, it's been difficult for smaller parties like the Green Party to have a voice in the House of Commons, for example. They don't have the Green Party is a party in the House of Commons, but it's not a recognized party. So we end up with basically two tiers of MPs. MPs that are not members of a recognized party, such as independent MPs and members of the Green Party in the House of Commons, and members of a recognized party like myself. I have greater rights in the House and in its committees than Elizabeth May does. So we've created a two-tier system that's a result of the changes of the last 50 years. So I don't think we can go back to getting rid of the rights accorded to political parties in the House, but I do think we need to take a look at continuing to reform parties in the House in order to address these inequities.
But that's a dead issue, isn't it? Electoral reform, isn't that a dead issue now?
Well, there's other ways to go about it as well. For example, if there's a take note debate, Elizabeth May, for example, doesn't actually have the right to participate in that debate as a speaker. Mm-hmm. It's the slots are only accorded to recognized parties in the House, not to.
I'm not allowed to be a member of a standing committee.
Yeah, that's another example, right?
Now that's ridiculous. Why would I not be allowed? I mean, I'm not asking for money. That the recognized parties immediately get, I don't know how many million of dollars a year in support from the people of Canada for their party work in Parliament. I've never asked for the money. I've just asked, can I sit on the committee? And I go to committees and, you know, and want to ask a question of a witness. But basically the best analogy is it's like the family dog at the dinner table. I go around and in real, when we were together, I'd go around and say, Michael, could you let me ask one of your questions? But now I send people messages on their text. Would you let me have some of your time? And I'm just going, I'm begging at every meeting. Can I get a question in this time? What do you think? Can I ask a question this time? I don't think people doubt that I do my homework and I'd ask a good question and it might advance the committee's work. And some of the people who were given by rights to the fact that we're the recognized party, they'll use up the 6 minutes in whatever. It might not be as useful in terms of advancing an issue. That's all I'm saying. There's so many rights that are accorded recognized parties, and then we get people like on Twitter. I get people saying, "Well, the NDP has raised this so many times, and you've only." I'm not allowed to speak. I'm not allowed. Greens aren't allowed an opposition day motion. So I won't rant on about it. But we're the only party. Again, we're the only country in the Westminster parliamentary system that has invented this idea of 2 tiers. There's not a recognized party system in other countries, nor there's a lot of things that are uniquely Canadian that don't contribute to a healthier democracy for individual members of parliament within the system. And that's the goal of the Democracy Caucus, is always, how do we advance the work that we can do together to create better exit interviews for people like Samara and Alex, where people would say, I feel good about the time I spent in parliament. That's not how people usually feel by the time they're leaving. They feel as though, well, I had to swallow this and swallow that. And I kept waiting for my chance. And I was either going to get to cabinet, but maybe I wasn't, but I got disciplined for this vote. And, you know, it's terrible to treat really wonderful citizens the way MPs get treated by their parties.
In the 6 minutes or so we have left, I wanted to loop the conversation back to climate and the inner workings of Parliament. And I'm wondering if the system that we have now, which is first past the post, party discipline, whipped votes, all that kind of stuff, if that makes any sort of meaningful, I guess depending on who you talk to, but meaningful progress towards climate change almost impossible. And this also loops in one of the questions that is on my screen here. And Alex, what do you think? I mean, can it happen in a system that is built the way the system is now, or do we need reform?
So in my opinion, I think it could actually work extremely well, provided that enough Canadians agree that this is what matters. I think that a lot of people will be shocked at how quickly things can potentially move. So the bigger issue in many ways is convincing Canadians that this is a pressing, urgent issue that needs to be dealt with. I personally always find it frustrating when people who are not happy with the way things are working start talking about changing the system, because changing the system becomes an objective in itself that is extremely complicated, that is very hard to advance, that offers no guarantees that you're going to achieve the policy outcome that you're really interested in the first place. So from my perspective, I think that complaining about the system is fine. I get it. In fact, I would argue that a lot of the standing orders, the rules that govern Parliament are, as Mr. Chong had said and Ms. May had indicated, they're actually a lot of the problems. But for the average person, they don't know what the standing orders are. There's no votes there. Nobody's talking about that. Only the politicians are. So I don't think the system is as big a problem in many ways in terms of what to focus on as it is to getting Canadians educated and informed about why climate change is a concern.
So how do you do that, Michael? How do you get them educated when people look at your party, rightly or wrongly, they think, well, at their convention, they don't think that climate change is real. How do you engage them in a conversation?
Well, I think two things I'll say. So first, I agree with Alex on this, that Canada's record on climate change is not a result of the first past the post system. And quite simply because we have a control and an experiment to refer to in the Westminster parliamentary system. The United Kingdom has done a tremendous job in reducing emissions, and they have the first past the post system. So I don't think it holds that the first past the post system is results in our climate change record. The second point I'll make is that in answer to your question is, I think the key, my belief is that we get change on climate policy in Canada by deconstructing the myth that we have about ourselves, about our record on climate change. And I think the work that Elizabeth May has done, that others have done in the House and through civil society groups, are starting to deconstruct that myth. We are not an environmental leader on the world stage. Our emissions continue to rise. In fact, they rose another 2 megatons in the most recent annual report from Environment Canada. Emissions have continued to rise under the current government for the last, since they took power in 2015. The results for 2020 have yet to be tabulated, but to paraphrase the UN ambassador to Canada's UN ambassador to the United Nations, declining national income is no way to achieve our goals. And so, setting aside 2020, emissions continue to rise. We need to tell people that, to deconstruct these myths that we're somehow a leader on the world stage when it comes to climate change. And I think that advocacy that people like Elizabeth May and others have done is starting to change and starting to change people's minds, starting to deconstruct the myth. As Alex has said, you can lead, but you can't lead too far ahead of the Canadian public by virtue of being in a democracy. And you're starting to see public opinion shift on this in the last several elections. Increasingly, Canadians are saying climate change is a voting issue for them, particularly in the swing ridings of Ontario. And so I think we're now starting to see parties respond to that and starting to increase the level of ambition that we need.
We've got about 2 minutes left. Elizabeth, go for it.
Okay, just going to say this system can deliver real climate action, and it's not only about telling the public to do more. If you look at when we were climate leaders in the world, and Brian Mulroney says this all the time, it takes leadership. It takes everyone knowing from the top that there's a commitment, that it's not half measures. And this was true on acid rain. This was true on ozone. This was true on numerous issues where, and it was that if there was in the Prime Minister's office, and I think Justin Trudeau really cares about the climate crisis. I believe that genuinely. But the political operatives around him are saying, or maybe himself, maybe he's just conflicted. You don't build the Trans Mountain Pipeline and claim climate leadership. They're incompatible positions in terms of the carbon budget, not opinion, but just the science of, and the Parliamentary Budget Office says the same thing. So yes, it matters to have leadership in a political system, because I think if COVID has shown us nothing else, Canadians are amazed to see, as you say, Alex, what governments are capable of doing when they're serious. We want that same seriousness of purpose and that same leadership to pull together with smart climate policies, which is Michael's referencing what they did in California. We don't destroy our economy in order to save our children in the future. We save our children in the future and build our economy at the same time, but not with half measures, not with incrementalism. It takes a leader who understands what's required and does it.
Okay, lots to think about. This has been an absolutely fantastic discussion. Hopefully we'll have more of them, but unfortunately we've run out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for this discussion. And I'm going to, now Sarah's going to jump in to let everyone know what they have to do from here on in. So Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and thank you, David, for such a great job moderating this panel as well. Thanks to all of our panelists. And thanks to the audience for some great guests. So we now have about a 15-minute break, and then you can join back in this plenary room for a session. It's the only one that will be running at 3:15 on breaking the equity barriers to environmental leadership in politics. Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
Thank you so much. Thanks, David. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Alex. Bye. Bye, Sarah.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.